All right, joining us on the line right now is Aaron Davis with the Washington Post, who's been doing some interesting reporting on this idea. And before we get too deep into this idea is pretty interesting. It's basically an idea that says that workers in the District of Columbia should have the option of taking as many as 16 weeks of paid family leave. 16 weeks. And before we get to Aaron, I just want to ask you, what would that mean at your workplace? Can you imagine a scenario where that would be the case where you work? If you can, I'd like to know what that would mean to your work environment. 888-630-9625, 1-888-630-WMAL. Aaron, good morning to you.
Good morning.
All right, so where is this thing? First of all, tell me where this idea originated that perhaps workers should be given as many as 16 weeks of paid leave.
Well, about a year ago, in the last State of the Union address, President Obama said that this is something that should happen, that the country should move forward more paid leave, that this would help close the gap between working families who don't have a lot of wherewithal when something goes wrong or they want to have a baby. So there was a big push about a year ago, and then after that, the Obama administration began giving local jurisdictions grants to study this idea and encouraging them to push forward if they'd like to. In some ways, you could argue doing an end run on Congress who won't do this kind of an effort anytime soon, it appears. And so D.C. got a grant. It got $100,000. It paid for a study, and the study, of course, was done actually by a group that has advocated for this. They did bring in a lot of outside economic experts, and said there's a lot of things you could argue in favor of this. And so here, that's where we are. The council in the fall, the majority of the council co-introduced, said that we backed this before there was much examination of it. And now this week we're seeing a really hard examination of the numbers and how much would it cost. And that's where we're seeing some problems.
Well, and how much might it cost?
Well, the group that did the study said they thought that it could be done for under 1% salary tax on all employees. And actually, it wouldn't be the employees paying it; it would be the employers who would be responsible in D.C., except for federal employees and the federal government, because D.C. cannot tax the federal government. So in some cases, federal employees or, self-employed people have to pay for this themselves, probably through a deduction through their income tax. And then private employers, all those folks would have to pay for some kind of system paying into a big fund. And the study said that they could do this under 1%. Well, the business community, the Washington Board of Trade, said it could be 150% bigger than that. It could cost $700 million. And then even the Urban Institute, which isn't very conservative on this issue, said we think it could be even more than that, $1.3 billion. So you back this out and try to figure out how much that actually means for each employee, and it's really not clear. And the council was kind of troubled yesterday that they couldn't really put a figure on how much this would cost.
And Aaron, D.C. has a reputation for being unfriendly to businesses. This is another tax on D.C. businesses. I know you're probably talking to the business community, as you just mentioned. What does this mean for businesses? Is this just going to drive them further away?
That's the contention by the Washington Board of Trade, by several folks who spoke from the business community yesterday before the council, saying, the minimum wage is already higher in D.C., there are sick leave obligations, a lot of things that D.C. tries to do to make life better for workers, compound in the costs for employers. On the flip side, the proponents of this bill say that, well, this is going to increase employer loyalty, it's going to give people peace of mind, you won't have to deal with the turnover costs, hidden costs in business, and all this would actually help and make people more loyal to employers in D.C. because they'd have a much better working environment than in Maryland or Virginia. Well, whichever side you take on this. The problem is that there's never been anything done quite like this in the country before.
It would be the most generous plan in the country, if approved, right?
Exactly. California gives partial pay reimbursement for up to 6 weeks. New Jersey does the same, but that's about it. And so D.C. would give almost full wage reimbursement for 16 weeks. And the problem yesterday was all these experts have totally different ideas about how many more people than currently take leave would do so if you're paying them a lot more money while they did it.
And Aaron, as you mentioned, the numbers seem fuzzy and people don't really have a clear idea of exactly how much this is all going to cost. We also know that the District of Columbia's chief financial officer has raised concerns saying that it is too expensive. And we also know that businesses most likely aren't going to be able to shoulder this alone. So what does that mean for taxpayers? How much do you think taxpayers are going to end up bearing the brunt for this new initiative?
My guess is the council will write it in a way that it would, whatever excess costs weren't factored in would have to then be kicked back and would be a function of a readjustment, and employers would have to pay more. It'll be curious to see what happens here. I think they're trying to do something very ambitious. I think there was also a real acknowledgement yesterday by the authors of this bill that they're willing and they may need to dial it back so that they don't have some huge balloon bill that comes due to employers. They'll try to keep it about that 1% rate. But I'm not sure anybody's quite confident yet how much that will get them and how quickly they can move.
Well, the numbers, as you say, are all over the place. Would it cost $300 million? Would it cost $700 million? Would it cost $1.3 billion? I mean, it's hard to know. Nobody seems to be able to tack this down. But to me, there's another issue here, and that is if I have a business in the District of Columbia, and at any point, employees could elect to take 16 weeks of paid leave, that destroys the productivity of my company. I can't, in many cases, especially in small businesses, I can't actually sustain my operation if people are going to be taking 4 months off.
I think there's one more hearing on this topic before the council. I think that is a topic that the council does want to explore. Thinking about this and talking to some of the people who study it, you would have to wonder if some new kind of temporary worker type environment will have to spring up in D.C., become much more robust to fill the gaps of people who take 16 weeks. You'd have to have some kind of temporary worker pool to draw on, or else how would you fill a lot of these positions? And they still haven't addressed what would happen because as it is right now, teachers could take this, firefighters could take this, doctors, all kinds of people that are not very easy to replace for 16 weeks.
And are they worried about district workers who might take advantage of it?
And there's of course a fraud issue, and the council chairman said yesterday he thought fraud would be at a much higher rate than in California and New Jersey, where it's not been very much of a problem. He said, if I have to make up a whole story to only get half of my salary, I'm not going to do that. But if I have to make up a story to get my entire full salary and not go to work, I'm much more likely to do that.
Well, fascinating stuff, and it's not dead yet, so it'd be interesting to see how this is handled. Aaron Davis, who covers D.C. government and politics for the Washington Post, it's good to have you here.